The Hard Rock Empire is on the air. We are back with another week of podcasting excellence here on the Hard Rock Empire. I'm Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. It is the music of February the 27th, 2026, as we wrap up the month of February here as we wrap up the month of March. We'll have one more week in March. That'll be next Sunday night, and we'll be jumping into the music of March coming up next week. But we've got a good week of music to get to wrap up the month of February before we do that, so we won't jump ahead too much. And, of course, we'll get into the vault, and we really are going into the vault today as we will be getting to a couple of albums released in the 1970s coming up on today's edition of the Hard Rock Empire. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. Pretty good week this week. Not a whole lot of noteworthy music, but still what I listened to I really enjoyed. Otherwise, a lot of Pokemon, a lot of tennis, a lot of injuring myself and all of that nonsense. It's funny talking about music from the 70s. It's like we're at the point now when you talk about how long ago that really was, you think you're exaggerating.
Yeah.
Like, no, it hasn't been that long. Well, yeah, it has. It's been a lifetime.
There are times where when you talk about stuff that came out in like the 90s now, and you compare it to the music that came out when you were a kid, and you just think, well, this was music that would have been out in the 50s and 60s when I was a kid, and that to me seemed like ancient history then, and then you realize that the 90s are kind of ancient history at this point, at least to young people, so it's
an easy way to make yourself feel old when you start doing the whole, this year, back in 1995, this was that many years ago, and this was new, and it's when you start making those comparisons, it's frightening.
I get suggested videos on YouTube all the time for like, here's 30 songs that came out 30 years ago, and here's 40 songs that came out 40 years ago, and I don't watch those all the time just because I don't want a whole fleet of those in my YouTube recommendations just to continue to remind me of how old I am, but it is definitely one of those things that it's pretty stark, honestly. Just kind of drives the whole point home, and we're going to get to music in the 70s coming up this week on the podcast. And
turns out that isn't 30 years ago.
It is not. It sure feels like it was. Obviously, both of the albums we're going to talk about were both before we were born, but at the same time, not so far before we were born that it feels like it should be that long ago, but yeah, it's an interesting time, and we'll talk more about kind of my thoughts on music from the 70s, and then we've talked a little bit more about it on the podcast in the past, but we'll get to that when we get to our vault segment, because I kind of have some thoughts on that, having gone through my vault pick.
It does kind of bring up another topic that we could talk about sometime, as far as how decades don't seem to have the same impact or like distinctness from each other, and maybe that's an age thing, but when you talk about music, and certainly rock music, it's like, when someone says 80s music, like, you know what they're talking about. I don't know if you have that same feeling when someone says aughts music or tens music.
Yeah, I feel like the 2000s do have a sound. There was that kind of post-grunge, like, rock. I don't know what the term for it is.
Post-grunge is usually...
Well, there you go.
Post-grunge and boy bands is pretty much what I think of when I think of 2000s.
But like the 2010s, I don't know if there's a distinct sound, but like you said, are we too close to it to really know what that is yet? Like if we get another 10 years down the road, will we be able to look back and kind of lump the groups in the 2010s together and say, okay, this is kind of what they were going for here? Because I mean, you do have some bands that they kind of made a sound in the 2010s, but I don't know if it was a sound that really covers the whole decade as much as just covers specific bands of that decade.
And there's probably something to be said for kind of the de-emphasizing of that monoculture where everyone listened to the same thing, everyone watched the same thing. It just isn't that way anymore. But it does make you wonder. I remember growing up, whenever they would do like the throwback weekends on radio stations playing like 70s and 80s, like, What are they going to do when we're going to throw it back to the 2010s? What artists and what songs will be the ones that are the mainstays?
Well, 90s music is showing up on oldie stations now, so
that's fair.
That's kind of depressing, honestly. That's your throwback, but yeah, that's a great question, and there probably are stations out there because you have satellite radio and Spotify and all that maybe do that, and it might be interesting to kind of look into that a little further and see if there are some threads to the more modern music that we can kind of put together. But for now, yeah, when we look back at the the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, even the 2000s, I think to some degree, it is pretty easy to kind of pin down 2 or 3 different styles of rock music that were really popular during that time. Yeah. And I think with each generation, you can pick 2 or 3 bands off the top of your head that if somebody doesn't know what that generation's music sounds like, if you give them 2 or 3 bands to do homework on, they can pretty much lock it in pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's necessarily the case yet with more modern music, but
hard to say.
Interesting topic for sure. Also interesting topic. Join the Discord. I've got it pinned in both the chats on YouTube and Twitch. That's where you'll hear about our schedule. You can join in on the conversation. Join our community, ever-growing community. Definitely join us on the Discord. You can do that in either one of those links. Those links are good for 7 days, and when we have a new episode, I'll post a new Discord link each and every week. Also, obviously we're going to get to Mike's playlist, which I'll be pasting in a moment into the chats. It's some really interesting stuff this week, February the 27th, so looking forward to that. Quick reminder, we'll be back again next week, Sunday night, 7 o'clock Eastern for the music of March the 6th. I believe we'll be coming back through the same days of the month again because February was
28 day February.
Even 28 days. So we'll be March the 6th next week. So looking forward to getting into the month of March's music. But with that said, it is time to get to the new music for this week. And I mentioned the playlist. I'll be pasting that into the chat in a moment. Mike has put together a playlist of some of the top rock and metal releases for a given date. That date is February the 27th. He's gone through and ranked them. I've gone through and listened to them. And between the two of us, we each pick one band to spotlight on the podcast today. As always, I encourage you to go through the playlist because there's a lot of good music out there this week, and we won't be able to talk about it all in our podcast. We're going to spotlight a few bands you should check out, but I definitely encourage you to go back and listen to the playlist because there was some really good stuff and some variety of styles this week, which always, to me, makes going through it a lot more fun when it's not just the same type of songs all the way through. But before we get to our specific picks, we always go to Mike to kind of see what we have from a spotlight standpoint of top name acts, re-releases, interesting names, just the variety of
overview,
things.
if you will.
Yeah, the playlist overview. So, Mike, what do you got for us this week?
Well, first we have to talk about the lone major release, I would say, and that would be the newest one from Rob Zombie, The Great Satan. It's his 8th studio album, not counting all the previous stuff with White Zombie. It's the first album since 2001's Sinister Urge to feature Mike Riggs on guitar, and the first album since 2006's Educated Horses to feature Blasco on bass, so kind of getting a little bit of a reunion going on there. If you look online, you'll find really positive and kind of middle-of-the-road reviews for the album. On the positive side, you have Ghost Cult Mag giving it a 10 out of 10, suggesting it is fantastic and shows that just because you came out in the 90s, it does not mean you have to forsake your sound if you're a good enough artist to perfect it. Moving into kind of more middle road stuff, we have the Toilet of Hell, giving it a 2.5 out of 5 Flaming Toilets of Hell. I kind of align myself with the statement he makes here. There's enough triumphs and misfires on The Great Satan in equal measure that I'm convinced Rob has something really interesting left in him. It's just a matter if we're going to get another really great album out of that. Pitchfork also with kind of a middle-of-the-road review, giving it a 5.4 out of 10. Being a little more critical, saying, for every rousing rocker, there's another kitschy experiment, witchy funk metal drizzled with unintelligible movie samples. I can also make a case for that as well. It's Rob Zombie. I think if you're a diehard fan, there's a lot to enjoy. To me, Hellbilly Deluxe and Sinister Urge were great. Hellbilly Deluxe 2 had a few tracks that could kind of stand up to those two albums, but honestly, I kind of dropped off a little after Hellbilly Deluxe 2, and I imagine quite a few people did. He still puts on a really good live show, and I'm kind of curious for people who don't know his catalog, like if you could do some sort of quiz coming up with a ridiculous name and having people guess whether it's a real album title or not. After Hellbilly Deluxe 2, we did have Venomous Rat Regeneration Vendor, the Electric Warlock Acid Witch Satanic Orgy Celebration Dispenser, the Lunar Injection Kool-Aid Eclipse Conspiracy, and then the much more tame now newest album, The Great Satan. So, yeah, it's not all bad. I don't think it's Hellbilly Deluxe, but I don't think it's going to be all these years removed from that.
I question anybody who reviews an album and gives it a 10 out of 10. Obviously, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. We make a whole podcast every week based on our
And I'm not a
opinions.
very negative reviewer, personally.
Yeah, and I'm not either. So, but at the same time, when you tell me something's a 10 out of 10, you're telling me that you think this is the greatest album that he has released ever. And
or at the very least equal to what you must consider to be perfect albums in his past.
Right. And that's really hard to believe. And that's not any slight on the album. That very well could be great. Like, that's a lot to live up to for a guy who's been doing it for a long time, to think that this effort is as good as some of the ones you mentioned that are really kind of widely accepted to be his best album. So
it's tough to compare to Hellbilly Deluxe and Sinister Urge. Those were huge.
Yeah.
And even commercially, like, you just think of how many times back then you heard Dragula on the radio.
Yeah.
I mean,
still.
Yeah, like, just the dude definitely nailed it there. And I think there's a little bit of trying to recapture that, but I don't think he's someone who's ever going to be content just remaking an album. So even though you kind of have a little more of that edge with the personnel on this album, you're not totally revisiting the past, I don't think.
And at the same time, maybe getting back together with these guys, like you said, that there's potentially something left in there where there's maybe one really great album still to come. And maybe by getting with those guys again and with more time to continue to develop whatever the next album's going to be, maybe that's still out there, that there is one more really great album. And again, not to dismiss this album.
No.
Certainly perfectly fine. If you're a fan of Rob Zombie, undoubtedly you bought it the day it came out, and you're probably pleased with it. But as far as like commercial success beyond just his diehard fans, I think there's room for him to have one more really great album if he can kind of put it all together.
Yeah, I would agree.
So, yeah, just one big release this week, but I know we had some other interesting stuff.
Yeah, as far as re-releases went, there was a new wave of British heavy metal band that started back in 1978. The band was Pagan Altar. They're re-releasing their 2006 album, Mythical and Magical. I didn't get a chance to listen to the whole thing, but I'm always a sucker for classic new wave of British heavy metal, so I'm definitely going to go back and check that out in its entirety. There were a couple albums that I did get around to listening to, thankfully, despite the busyness of this week. One of which being from the band A Wilhelm Scream. Their album Cheap Heat. They're a Massachusetts-based melodic hardcore band. Definitely kind of a different flavor than my pick this week, but worth a listen. We also had Locust Noir's album Shadow Sun. They are a Swiss gothic metal dark wave band. And again, talk about change of pace. Definitely different than melodic hardcore and, classic hard rock, which is kind of what my pick leaned into. But yeah, I mean, a lot of variety out there if you're looking for something different than what we talk about, but good times.
And I think we have a couple of interesting names this week, if I remember right, because I think you teased us a little bit with some of those last week.
Yeah, I had quite a few, actually. The standouts to me included the newest album from the band Necrofire, Transcend into Oblivion. Not to be outdone, we also have Necrosexual and their album Road to Rubble. I think my favorite name out of all these, though, has to be No Murder, No Mustache.
Yeah,
with their album As Everything Else Decays. And finally, the band Owls Over Oaks with their album OOO. So,
okay.
Yeah, kind of a weird assortment of names there.
Yeah, definitely some interesting stuff there. And if you're looking for stuff that has some strange names, there was a good quantity of stuff to find this week.
Yeah.
But of course, that's not how we pick our acts. I mean, maybe sometimes that does draw us to something if it seems to be interesting. Obviously, we're looking for what we think are two of the standout albums of the week. And it is kind of ironic that the week I finally get off of my vault gimmick with the Frontiers bands that we've gone that direction this week. But honestly, I think the two albums that we're going to talk about were kind of the standout albums for this week. I think they were both really excellent, and I enjoyed both of them tremendously. And with that said, it is time to get to your pick for the week. What do you have for us?
Yeah, so for my first pick, like you kind of alluded to, it's been a while since I've picked a Frontiers album. Although I've listened to the new Megadeth quite a bit, which is kind of a Frontiers album, so that counts in one way, shape, or form.
True.
But for my pick this week, we are looking at the band Black Swan and their newest album, Paralyzed.
Yeah, this was really good. I mentioned I picked first, and I easily could have gone either way with my pick. I thought this was really, really excellent stuff.
Yeah, two great kind of ensemble casts, great vocals on both, just really good stuff. This is their third album. They are a rock supergroup who first got together in 2019, featuring Jeff Pilson on guitar, bass, and keyboards, obviously from Dokken, Foreigner, and many others. Matt Starr on drums, who played with Ace Frehley, Joe Lynn Turner, Kevin Dubrow, Love Hate, and Mr. Big. Reb Beach, great guitarist from Winger, Dokken, and Whitesnake. And finally on vocals, we have Robin McCauley, formerly of MSG. So you got some talent there, if nothing else. The first thing that hit me when listening to this album was just how strong Robin McAuley's vocals still are. Like, the dude can bring it. It definitely made the album stand out to me. The Frontiers listing for the album touts the band's chemistry, and you can definitely hear it. It doesn't just feel like an ensemble cast going through the motions. The product somehow feels greater than the sum of its parts, even though the sum of its parts is actually really great too. Standout tracks on the album include When the Cold Wind Blows, If I Was King, Shakedown, The Fire and the Flame, Carry On, and the track that we're going to listen to, the title track, Paralyzed.
Let's check these guys out. Really good stuff from the ensemble supergroup Black Swan. This is their new album, Paralyzed. This is the 7th or 8th track, I should say, of this album. The title track, Paralyzed. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. Yeah, the one thing that really stood out to me listening to the album, and I know you've mentioned it as well, is it feels like a cohesive effort when you have these super groups, especially with Frontiers, because they do such a great job of putting these groups together, or at least facilitating what they're doing. You always wonder, like, how much of it's going to feel like a complete album and how much of it is going to feel like five guys just getting their own stuff in, basically. And this didn't feel like that. It felt very cohesive. Everybody had their spot to shine, but nobody seemed to be trying to take over the album. And you're right, the vocals are, incredibly strong. It's just a really good album front to back. I think if you're a fan of any of the groups that you mentioned that these guys have come from, I think you're going to find something on this album that you really dig.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's funny because while I don't think the album felt necessarily like really Dokken like, that solo coming out of the chorus there, it kind of gave me those vibes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's an example of, even though this kind of music, and we've talked about it, and I've talked about it a lot, this music isn't in the forefront. It isn't commercially what people care about. This feels fresh, but still in that style. Like, if we weren't told years ago that we shouldn't like this kind of music anymore, this feels like what this music should sound like in 2026. It's really solid, but not different. And
honestly, I feel like Frontiers has been pretty light on releases so far in 2026, so it was encouraging to hear actually 3 big releases from them this week. There was a third one as well that I thought was, what I've heard of it, is really solid, but this was just, like I said, on another level, and I think it's a shame that there's not mainstream appeal for this beyond old fans of these bands kind of seeing these guys live or whatever it may be, but I honestly would subscribe to any satellite radio channel that's just playing new music like this, because I would listen to this all day long.
Kind of made me wonder as I was listening to this, like, I wonder what it's like for these musicians, and it's probably been this way for years now. You kind of had that period where they obviously got ostracized for being pop metal, essentially. There had to be a point in time where they were just like, wait, so now no one really cares what we release. We can do whatever we want. Mm-hmm. Like, there has to be something, even if it's less financially viable, there's a certain freedom to just, like, no one's going to come back and say, hey, you sold out on this album, or hey, you did this. You can just create whatever you want, and the people who like it will find it.
Yeah, and we do, and it's great. And I think that's, Frontiers isn't the only label that's been doing this, but they certainly have been at the forefront of that, and it's great because, you're going to allow these guys who are incredibly talented to continue to do really cool things all these years later and get out there and tour and support it and everything else. And it's fun, honestly, as a music fan, to keep hearing this stuff. So
I would agree.
Definitely check these guys out. Really enjoyed this album, Black Swan, their new album out this week. As I mentioned, I am sticking with the Frontiers theme as well, and I really, really enjoyed this album. Like I said, I thought it was kind of 1A and 1B this week for these albums. We're talking about another super group. This is Joel Hoekstra's 13, and the album is From the Fade. Obviously, the names here maybe as big. I don't know how you want to compare them side by side, but certainly among as big as the ones that Mike just mentioned. Starting off, guitarist and composer Joel Hoekstra from Whitesnake, Cher, Trans-Siberian Orchestra. You have drummer Vinny Appice from Black Sabbath and Dio. Bassist Tony Franklin from The Firm and Blue Murder. Derek Sherenian from Dream Theater and Sons of Apollo on keyboards. And a guy we've talked about a lot on this podcast, especially with Frontiers Acts, the vocalist Girish Pradhan, who has done his own stuff. He's been on a bunch of other stuff, and he's been fantastic. And then you have Jeff Scott Soto on backing vocals. So, you're bringing the heavy hitters here. These guys have been around since 2015. Their first album was released then. It had Russell Allen. Chris joining us on YouTube today. Welcome, Chris. Had Russell Allen and Jeff Scott Soto splitting vocal duties at that first album. Dying to Live was the name of that album. Russell Allen, as we've talked about, Russell Allen involved with 700 different projects, so he probably just didn't have time to continue on. And they bring in Girish Pradhan, and, he's phenomenal. This is melodic rock at its best. It's what Frontiers does best, bringing these bands together and letting them do their thing. It's a great album, beginning to end. I didn't think there were any weak tracks on this album. Pradhan, his vocals are amazing, and again, it's another album just like the one we just talked about with Black Swan, where everybody on the album kind of gets to do their thing, but nobody feels like they're kind of taking over the whole album. Hoekstra's out there touring on his own, doing some other stuff, so I'm sure if you want to catch him, you're going to be able to do that. He's incredibly talented and another guy that's involved in a lot of different stuff. So he's on one of the big rock cruises coming up, in fact. So definitely check him out. But if you get a chance, if these guys tour as a unit, I highly encourage you to check this out. Standout tracks include You Can Give, The Fall, All I Do, and the song we're going to listen to on the podcast is Lifeline. Let's check these guys out. Joel Hoekstra's 13, From the Fade. Featuring Girish Pradhan. This is the third track off of this album, Lifeline. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. Yeah, it's, like I said, incredibly talented group. Just put together another really outstanding album and really made for an easy listen going through this album. Mike, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mentioned it when we were first going through the music before, that this, along with the Black Swan album, just really stood out. Girish is like that next generation of just great hard rock vocalists, and when you mention people like Robin McCauley, Jeff Scott Soto, Russell Allen, you kind of get that descending, like, not evolution, but different generations of that style of vocalist getting younger and younger, and it's good to see they're still out there churning out singers like that. You mentioned cruises. I got to mention that, and I really hope this eventually will lead to some sort of new material, that the Monsters of Rock cruise this year, Saigon Kick's going to be there.
Oh, man.
The majority of the band, the original lead vocalist, will not be with them. He hasn't been with them in a while now, but you are getting Jeff Scott Soto in his place, along with Beeler, Verone, McClernand, and Gibbs. So, I mean, Beeler's a monster, so is Soto. I would love to see that, and I would love to see them create some new music with that lineup.
Yeah, if Frontiers isn't on that, they need to get on that, or one of these other labels that we talk about all the time, because I would kill for another album from those guys. But that's a good sign that they're going to be there, so maybe that's the first step to some new music. But two really great releases from Frontiers, and again, there was a third one as well that was really good. Check out the playlist for that one, but overall, just some great melodic metal, melodic AOR rock this week that you definitely need to check both of them out.
And like some former and current Dream Theater members out there too. Obviously, Derek Sherinian out there with your pick, and then Inside Out Records released the newest one from the Neil Morse Band, which features Mike Portnoy on drums. So they're busy.
No doubt about that. If you were watching on Twitch, we're getting ready to step aside for a quick 90-second break. Please don't go anywhere. Obviously, you can subscribe. You can use your Prime to subscribe for free once a month. But the ads do help us pay the bills. We really appreciate if you stick through the ads. We won't miss any content. We'll get back to the vault when we come back. If you're on YouTube, you're going to hear Mike and I just ramble a little bit about who knows what, but that'll be coming up on YouTube. But stick around if you're on Twitch, and we'll be back in about 90 seconds to get to the vault as we take a throwback into the 1970s. And the ads are underway. And yeah, those cruises are kind of sometimes a good indication of what bands might be kind of getting going again or thinking about going out on tour. And Saigon Kick is one that I love their music, and I would love to see them go out. And it'll be interesting to see, kind of what comes out of some of those types of mega tours. Obviously, we talk a lot about Sonic Temple. It's, it had these festivals, but these rock cruises have been gaining in popularity, and we're seeing a lot of these kind of throwback acts kind of show up there, and you hope that maybe it's the impetus to get them to make more music.
Yeah, for sure. I know Saigon Kick's been doing some kind of like spot shows here and there, mostly in and around Florida. I think they did go to Chicago a while back as well. I would love to see a larger tour featuring them and put together a couple other bands, maybe make it a thing. But yeah, I always excited about the possibility of more music from them.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously those tours, keep an eye out for, obviously the cruises, you're kind of limited in dates and times, but some of these other festival type events, especially if you're in Europe, if you're listening to us overseas, you guys are the lucky ones that get these big giant outdoor festivals like Wacken, and, you don't ever have to want for opportunities to see these bands live.
I was looking at the Monsters of Rock cruise, April 12th through 17th, Black Label Society, Night Ranger, The Darkness, Queensryche, Striper, Symphony X, Y&T, Slaughter. Let's see, going down here, we got Disneyland After Dark, Nelson, Loudness, just kind of picking up Soto. Wow, Jeff Scott Soto's going to be busy. We got Soto Ellefson, we have Soto, we have Soto Beeler, we have, let's see, that might be it, not counting the Saigon Kick stuff as well. But man, like Hoekstra Gibbs going to be there. Nestor's going to be there. That would
nice.
Be really cool to see as well. Max Sabbath will be there
nice.
as well.
I love Max Sabbath.
So yeah, I mean, would be a pretty cool experience for sure.
I'm not a big cruise guy, but a lineup like that might make me want to change my mind and think about doing something like that.
It's definitely stacked if you're into this kind of music.
No doubt about that. But that's most of the new music for this week. It's time to get into the vault where Mike and I will each give you a classic album to check out. And each of us are on different gimmicks. And thankfully, I'm on a new gimmick. I've enjoyed my run through Frontiers music, but we'll get to what I'm getting to coming up in a moment. We're going to get to Mike's gimmick, and he's working through two as well. Obviously, last week we talked about another band that will be performing at Sonic Temple. We'll get back to that again next week. But this week he's going back through starting in 1969 and going 1 year at a time to review some albums out there. And, I went through them once, but there's so much good music out there that you can't possibly talk about all of it in one pass through the years. So we've had some good stuff already as you started your journey on this, but really interested to hear about this one. I think it's certainly a moment in classic rock history that changed the course of what rock's going to sound like and what is actually rock in the 1970s. So what do you have for your vault pick this week?
Yeah, so diving into 1971, we did have a few what I think to be noteworthy debuts, Budgie with their debut album, Nazareth, self-titled debut, and then also The Sweet had their debut. I did not pick any of those, but worth noting. I I went through the list, and obviously, yes, Release Fragile in 1971, but we've talked about that in the past, so I wanted to stay away from that. Deep Purple had their Fireball album, but I just talked about them 2 weeks ago. So the one that really stood out to me beyond that, and one that honestly I probably should have listened to a long time ago, just kind of knowing it's their album with kind of their biggest songs, most commercially successful album, and just between the cover art and the hits that I knew of it, I just had a feeling it was going to be pretty iconic, and yeah, I was not wrong. We are looking at today the fourth album from the British progressive folk and hard rock band Jethro Tull, released on March 19th, 1971. We have Aqualung.
Yeah, this is one I would like to go back myself this week and listen to all the way through because, like you said, the hits are iconic. And again, this is a band that took what you knew about rock and roll and said, well, that's great, but what if we do some different stuff? And as a lot of the progressive bands were doing back then, and these guys just took it to a totally different level, and this album was kind of that moment where they established themselves as an all-time great.
It's kind of weird because in a way it almost worked in reverse. It's like they were doing the weird stuff.
Yeah.
And then kind of in the early 70s, you had a lot of these bands that slowly started converging into the world of hard rock. Like I don't know what drove that, whether it was some of the stuff when you listen to it, you think, man, it sounds kind of Led Zeppelin-y. I don't know if that played an influence on some of the bands, but they definitely hardened their sound, maybe kind of diverged away from some of the more progressive and psychedelic elements, which is fine with me. But yeah, it's interesting how it worked. I did want to mention this is the hard rock band, not their namesake, Jethro Tull, the 17th and 18th century English agriculturalist who perfected the horse-drawn seed drill in 1701.
Yes.
So definitely an important figure, kind of like Eli Whitney of England, I suppose. But yeah, this is actually the band. This album featured Ian Anderson on lead vocals, acoustic guitar, flute, and production, Martin Barr on electric guitar and descant recorder, whatever that is, Jeffrey Hammond on bass guitar, alto recorder, odd voices and backing vocals on Mother Goose, John Evan, piano, organ, and mellotron, and Clive Bunker on drums and percussion. Like I mentioned, this is their fourth studio album, also their best-selling album, exceeding 7 million copies sold worldwide, and it's kind of what propelled them to being an FM radio mainstay and arena act. The Wikipedia article suggests that it was the more riff-heavy nature of songs like Locomotive Breath, Hymn 43, and Wind Up playing a factor in the band's increased success. It also points out that this album had a lot more acoustic guitar than prior releases. I don't know if that, again, kind of points to the departure from the more psychedelic elements of and maybe veering more into hard rock and folk rock even, but it works. Definitely a good direction to go. The album is generally regarded as a concept album, with the central theme being the distinction between religion and God. Ian Anderson always denied it being a concept album, but evidently when people kept talking about that being the case, he kind of took that as inspiration for their follow-up album, basically saying, if you want a concept album, I'll show you a concept album. The initial idea for the album came from photographs that Anderson's wife took of homeless people. One photo in particular inspired the writing of the title track, the obvious classic song Aqualung. The cover art by Burton Silverman was inspired by that same photograph, which if you look at it, it's just a downtrodden-looking man who he's the inspiration for all this. Who knew? Something really iconic about the riff to Aqualung, as well as kind of the slower melody that it kind of descends into. The album has some really heavy riffs, to Wikipedia's point. The main riff to My God, you could pretty much write any song around that riff and it's still going to rock. Same could be said about Hymn 43 and Locomotive Breath. I think the acoustic plays really well with the flute. You can hear that in the very folky sounding song Mother Goose. And I mentioned it kind of in the segue into this, talking about this album, is this kind of feels like that point in time where a lot of these bands are shifting to a heavier riff style, more hard rock. That was kind of the main point behind Deep Purple's In Rock album, was them kind of veering more into hard rock. 1971 also saw Alice Cooper release Love It to Death, which saw them pivot more towards the hard rock style as well. I'm sure there are many other examples. It's kind of wild, since my core music fandom doesn't really start until the 80s. I always find myself lamenting not being older when that stuff first hit, to kind of feel part of that scene or that movement. I think the same could be said about the early 70s. I think you have a lot of bands that are kind of finding something and finding their sound and really becoming those bands that would influence the bands I really like. I can't imagine how exciting it must have been for a music fan at that point in time. From a historical perspective, obviously, it's worth checking this album out. It's solid. If you just like rock and you don't want the extra stuff, it may be a little much for you. But I think it doesn't feel over the top enough to be not fun to listen to for me. Standout tracks obviously include Aqualung, Cross-Eyed Mary, My God, Hymn 43, Locomotive Breath, and Wind Up. It was funny when I pulled this up on YouTube Music because the version they had there was like some sort of remastered version that had like 28 tracks or something like that. When I pulled it up, I'm just like, no, I'm not doing that again this week. I'm not listening to. But the original release was just 11 tracks and still pretty lengthy, but digestible. But yeah, good album, worth listening to.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into that one because, again, it is kind of one of those albums that change music. And I think there's something to be said for a list of those. Like, if you want to know what really went on to influence other bands and change the course of classic rock, this album is definitely one of them. And I have a feeling a lot of the ones you're going to be picking in the 70s are going to fall into that category. Yeah. Albums that are just either criminally underrated or incredibly important to what is to come in the 80s and 90s and beyond.
And I think it's important to kind of get that perspective of, okay, this is what the bands I really, really like, this is what they listened to, this is what they grew up on, this is what shaped their sound. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's going to be an interesting run through. So looking forward to that continuing on in a couple weeks with 1972. Obviously, next week we'll get back into our Sonic Temple preview as we continue closer to May when Sonic Temple rolls around. I have finished my run through Frontiers music. It took me almost a year to get through all the alphabet. Now we are moving on to 2 new gimmicks. Next week, starting in 1969, I'm going to be going through and finding one-hit wonders of each year and listening to the whole album that they came off of and deciding whether it was good or whether it was bad, or if there should have been other songs on the album that actually should have been the hits other than the one that we ended up getting for that year. But that's next week. Starting this week and every other week for a while, I'm going to be taking one of my favorite bands, and we're going to start at the beginning, and we're going to listen to every studio album the band has released and rank them and talk about the review and talk about the album. The band I ended up deciding to choose was Journey. So I have also created a tier list, which I'll pop up on the screen really quick. Basically have given these 5 categories, one being the best of the best. Number 2, great hits, but maybe not quite as good as the best albums. The third one probably will listen to just on the greatest hits releases only. I probably won't go back to the albums. Number 4, it's just an excellent musicianship, but probably won't go back and re-listen to the album. And number 5 would be probably didn't need to listen to this one at all. So I don't know if we'll have any in that bottom tier, but that is kind of what we're looking at from the tier list, and I'll update that each week. So we are getting started with the beginning. We are starting off with the self-titled debut in 1975, and it is Journey with Journey. Journey with their classic lineup. 1975, you had Greg Rowley on lead vocals and keyboards, Neil Schon on lead guitar and vocals, George Tickner on rhythm guitar, Ross Valerie on bass guitar, pianos, and vocals, and Ainsley Dunbar on drums. Valerie and Tickner came over from a band known as Frumious Bandersnatch. They had some interesting music, as Mike was alluding to earlier, a couple of guys coming from more psychedelic music and into more classic rock. This was released on April the 1st, 1975 by Columbia Records. It is progressive rock. If you like prog rock, this is right up your alley. It's the only album to feature George Tickner in the lineup. There was a demo album that came out prior to this with some of the same songs, some more instrumental pieces, because as you're going to find out if you listen to this, there's a lot of instrumental stuff on this album. The only single that came off this album was the song To Play Some Music, was the 4th track on the 1975 debut. Did not chart The single did not reach any of the charts. The album itself peaked at number 138 on the Billboard 200 in the United States and number 72 in Japan because, of course, why not? It was the only single, as I mentioned, from the band's debut album. The single sounds like a song that should be played right after Chicago's Saturday in the Park. Feels very much like here's the band, all these talented musicians getting together and talking about why they're going to play some music. It almost feels very fitting. I think, the instrument that kind of makes what Journey was in 1975 is the Hammond B3 organ that Rowley plays throughout this. It's iconic sound. You'll know it as soon as you hear it. Definitely gives the feel for what this is going for. My take, it's a prog rock album. There are lots of solos outside of the one track that's instrumental. If you're looking for the hits of the 70s and 80s, if that's what you know Journey by, this is not any of that. But it's an album full of incredibly talented performances that all get space to shine. You could tell, even at this point in 1975, that they were a front man away from really making it big. Not that the vocals were bad by any stretch, but they were vocals that were really not meant to take the shine away from the instrumental talent on the album, really just kind of an accompaniment. That obviously changed later on, and we'll get to that in a few weeks. It's an enjoyable album. It was really good. If you like that type of music, it's probably not one that I'm going to revisit very often. So on my tier list, it earns a spot at excellent musicianship, but probably limited re-listens. I can't imagine putting this on and listening to it regularly. There were reviews. All Music, which seems to hate everything, gives it 2 out of 5. But notable that the written reviews were all very positive on All Music. The one I chose to pull, because I couldn't find any negative written reviews, the All Music review that I pulled from said, I imagine many recreational substances have been consumed over the years to the backdrop of this album. However, they are not necessary to enjoy it. It is what I call a late-night album for me. Just pop it in and drift away with Rowley, Sean, Dunbar, Valerie, and Tickner as they begin their journey. Rolling Stone ruled it favorable. There's no number ranking, but they ruled it as favorable. The Rolling Stone review says, Journey is the third and best group to grow out of the original Santana. Unlike Azteca and Malo, it's not merely a spinoff. Keyboardist and singer Greg Rowley and lead guitarist Neil Sean, both formerly of Santana, have come up with a more energetic and less contemplative music than Carlos Santana has been making lately. The rhythm section is led by Ainsley Dunbar, complex and experienced drumming, while producer Roy Halley has contributed to the group's original sound by placing Rowley's piano within the rhythm section and leaving Sean's guitar as the lead instrument. His sensitive mix prevents the lackluster vocals from intruding on the band's instrumental strength. To play some music is the album's most commercial cut, while Topaz breaks away from the steady rock format with some bluesy sentiment, a strong beginning. So even at this point, when that review was listed, they kind of knew there were good things ahead for Journey. Standout tracks of a lifetime, In the Morning Day, To Play Some Music, and Mystery Mountain are the ones you're going to want to listen to. Overall, I enjoyed it. Probably wouldn't go back and listen to it again, but will be interesting to see how that develops. Their next album will be 1 year later in 1976. It'll look into the future. We'll be talking about that in 2 weeks' time, but definitely an interesting exercise.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the reviews change when they find their more successful sound. Will you find that maybe the score-only reviews will go up, but the written reviews may become a little more critical? The people that actually put time and effort into writing the reviews will be like, doesn't have the same kind of soul that their early work had. I'm curious how that's going to shake out.
Yeah, I am too. And that's why I wanted to include the reviews, because I kind of want to see how they evolve. And obviously, if there's a funny one, we can spotlight that as well. But it is notable that the first 3 albums, which are the 3 pre-Steve Perry albums, are the only 3 albums in the band's history that feature the members of the band on the album. That went away as soon as Perry joined in album 4, which of course was their first big commercially successful album. But I don't know what the thinking was of that, but it's definitely interesting. But yeah, if you're a fan of Journey, I think it's worth putting this on and listening to it. You can find it on YouTube Music. It's a totally different experience, but I think one that if you love musicianship and prog rock, I think you're going to really dig this. So Definitely worth checking out. But with that said, that is going to wrap up this edition of the Hard Rock Empire. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode. We'll be back again next Sunday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. The music of March the 6th will be on the agenda for next week. Looking forward to bringing that to you next Sunday night at our regular time here on the Hard Rock Empire. Big thanks to Chris for joining us in the YouTube chat. Of course, you can always join us on YouTube or on Twitch Live. And, of course, there'll be a VOD on YouTube in a little bit. Big thanks to Mike, as always, for his hard work on the podcast. Big thanks to Stoveleg Media for their continued support of our podcast. And a big thanks to you for listening whenever and wherever you are listening to us. We'll talk to you again next Sunday night for another episode of the Hard Rock Empire. Until then, don't forget to join the Empire, the Hard Rock Empire.